Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning. Sorry we're getting started a little late. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty going on here in my office, but I think we've managed to figure that all out. So I'm glad you've joined us. I'm glad you're here, and we're going to roll on into this and get started pretty quickly since we're a little short in time. But what I wanted to point out is that this is our Tech Safety and Digital Service for DV Programs webinar, and I am Deidre Boyland, and I will walk you through a couple of things here. This webinar was supported and funded by the Washington State Department of Social Health, Services of Children's Administration. So we want to say, yay! Thank you, DSHS, for supporting us and helping us and funding the things that we do. Listening, so it's best if you can see your panel, you can see what's going on, and make sure you put your everything on mute. I can't get it to scroll to the next screen. What did you do? It's best if you listen through your computer speakers. Remember to unmute your speakers. If that's not working, listen by phone. Select the telephone option on your control panel for further instructions. Right now, everyone is on mute, so please use the question box to communicate. I think a few of you have already started doing that, so that's fantastic. We will definitely try to get to all of your questions, so if we don't, I do apologize for that, but there's going to be quite a few people on this call today. So right now we're at about 77 folks, so that's a great turnout. You guys are making me feel super special. I feel like a Wendy Williams talk show host. Like, what does she say? What is like? She always has her little saying. So I feel really, really special today that all of you guys have joined in to listen to this webinar. So how you doing? That's what she says, right? If your panel minimizes to the side of the screen, click the orange arrow to get it back. So here today you have myself. I'm the program coordinator at WSCDIV. You see my number that's up on the slide. Wade Treckler, from the Vice President of Technology, National Domestic Violence Hotline, will be on the call with us today. And Brian Pinero, he's also from the Domestic Violence Hotline. And Love and Respect, they will also be on the line with us today to help us out and learn more about tech safety. So we're really excited to hear from both of them today. And I've been chatting with them, and I'm just really excited to hear what they're going to be talking about. So exciting. We also have Judy Chen, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives here at WSCDIV, who's also my boss. Woohoo! Go, Judy. And we have June Lovall, who was my former coworker at New Beginnings, and she's here as well. She was the former YWCA Regional Director, and she was the former also on our WSCDIV board member. So she is, I guess, retired from both of those. So she is living the life.
I am, but I'm still heart and soul with the coalition and happy to be here.
Yay. Judy?
I'm running the technology chat, so if you're having a problem, it's because I'm not up on technology, but I'm doing my best.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and welcome.
Thanks. Also, we have Becca Campbell. She's our administrative assistant who at WSCDIV here, who is also helping us. So as you can see, it takes like 4 or 5 of us to actually run this whole process. So I just want to say thank you for your patience. All right, so we had a fantastic response to this webinar. So over 200 people signed up for this and are registered, and we're just really excited about it. Right now, we're up to about 86 folks, so that's great. Unfortunately, our webinar system can only accommodate about 100 attendees at once. So what does this mean for you? Multiple coworkers from the same agency should gather around one computer if that's possible, so we can now allow other folks to sign on and get the same great information that you're about to hear. Plan to show up. Most of you have already been here early, so that's great. And don't panic, we're going to record this. So hopefully it'll be on our website within the next couple of days, and you can listen to it, or other folks can listen in and hear if they've missed out on the webinar. So we're really excited that we get to record it.
Yeah, and kudos, at 9:45 there were 35 people already signed in, ready to go. So you got a spot.
Yay! So we're going to review some common tech safety issues for DV advocates to be aware of, including ways that abusers may use technology to monitor, control, stalk, and harass survivors. Then we'll discuss the ways that DV programs might consider using technology to interact with survivors, such as incorporating text messages or online chats into crisis line services. And remember, at the end of this webinar, if you could please fill out your evaluation that pops up at the very end. And the first question asks, who else from your program attended this webinar? And please let us know so that if there are more than one person that's hanging out in your office with you, make sure all their names are attached so we can identify and get folks their certificates who attended the training. So at this point, if you can give me about a minute, we're going to turn this over to Wade and Brian, and they're going to take over and give us some great information. Thanks. Hold tight.
Hey, Wade, are you there? We're ready for you.
Okay, hey, so this is Brian Pinero with the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
And this is Wade Treichler, also with the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I want to thank everybody for signing on today. We're real excited about this.
So the plan that we have is what we want to do is kind of go through just a little bit just about kind of lessons learned in just doing digital services at the hotline. I do want to be clear that one of the things that we try to tell people up front is that when we talk about digital services and we just talk about moving into a place in which you start evaluating if your organization is ready, we talk about it from the perspective of doing crisis intervention. So when we talk about this, we're not talking about using it in case management. We're not seeing it necessarily in using it as ongoing services with the victim outside of when they initially come in. We do work closely with NNEDV, and they're the ones that we really just want to make sure that everybody realizes that when it comes to actually working on the ground with clients, they're the best ones and the ones that should be consulted in regards to that. We are working together to start looking at how do we expand services to victims. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, we do have conversations, and we're trying to constantly prove that. I don't know anything else that you want to add to it, Wade. But we'll also throw in some things about, especially when you start talking to vendors, about how you start talking to them about making sure that your safety measures are put into place, but also that they understand the unique needs of our services.
And just a quick question, can we get a confirmation from somebody on the ground there that y'all can see our screen, that we are sharing correctly? We're going to take that as a yes and keep going.
Yeah,
okay.
Things are good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So this link went out to everybody beforehand, but we do, one of the things that we want to offer as a resource to everybody on the call here is that we have a tech assessment readiness tool that we've crafted on the Hotline website. And we're bringing this up at the beginning just to make sure everybody's had a chance to look at it and can see which pieces are relevant. And really what this guide is attempting to encompass is everything that we've seen over the years in terms of potential pitfalls, technology issues, safety concerns, privacy concerns, and some of what the hotline considers to be best practices in providing digital services. We will cover some or a lot of this in this webinar, but please keep in mind this is a resource that we are happy to share and use and also receive feedback on. So if you guys encounter something that doesn't quite square with what you're experiencing on the ground, we'd love to hear about it, and we will have our contact information posted at the end.
So the other thing too, we do try to keep this updated. it's one of the things where we see this as just kind of a way to use best practices, and also it's just a great way just to kind of look at about like what you maybe can avoid. So don't take everything that's in there that it's naturally going to make sense that your organization may be further along, and you may pick and choose what you want from it, but it's just a roadmap that we utilize and that we posted online. Wade's trying to make the print a little bit bigger, so just give us one more second. Look. Okay. Having a little bit of difficulty here. We're going to get this figured out. One more second. I think we've got this. So again, that's why I talk. As many people may know, the hotline has been around now for 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary. Originally, when the hotline started, we only offered services up to 2007 through phones. At that time, we did see that phone was the number one way that people contacted us. Was the only thing. We had a few people at the time who would send emails, but we had shied away from utilizing email for us just because we could not develop a system that was safe. So during this time, we did recognize that things were beginning to change, that the hotline was receiving an increase in young adults that were contacting us, and also just at this time is when we started noticing the growth of, at the time, if you go back to 2006 and 2005, chat rooms, and also just a lot more use of instant message was beginning to happen more and more as a way that people would to socialize. Young people were especially using this to talk, and it was at this time that we recognized that we needed to start looking at providing a new service and also utilize some of this growth in instant message, and so that's when we created Love is Respect in 2007 and 2008. This project focused purely at the time on teens and young adults, which eventually grew to include over 18 and up to 24. We did launch it as a peer-to-peer service, and we launched our first chat project at the same time as this, and so we had chat on on Love is Respect for about, I'd say, about 5 years. Did not move it to the hotline right away, and a lot of that had to do with just wondering if people were necessarily going to want to utilize it as adults, but also it's just learning and trying to figure out chat for us. It took us several years to try to get, whether it was from what provider we used, kind of understanding kind of the needs that came with the problems we encountered with information and how people were able to digest information that we sent chat, and also just figuring out the best way to do crisis work digitally. So as we moved forward, we recognized that we did want to go ahead and start chat for the hotline. And the way that we saw that was that we wanted to try to make it as safe as possible, of course, but also we wanted to start collecting more information and more data. After about 3 years, we really recognized that the product that we were using, you could only see 3, maybe 4 chats that were in queue. And then after that, there was no way to tell how many you had, but also we just weren't able to collect any metrics at the time. So we spent a lot of time kind of looking at what the technology would be best to use to move forward. And as we gathered some information, we recognized that this service was no longer something that should be offered for a limited time basis in the scope of our work, but we recognized it was time to move to 24/7 on Love is Respect. And so on that one, we launched those services in 2011, where we did go to 24/7, but it was also the time in looking at a lot of the research that we saw, especially with the Pew Internet and American Life. And if you have not actually looked at that body of research, that is something that strongly drove a lot of the expansion of our services, including text messaging, and that's the Pew Internet and American Life project. At the time in 2010 and 11, the use of text messaging was extremely high in teens and young adults under the age of 19, but also I think as smartphones had, I would say, saturated the market at this point with young adults, and especially with young people of color, we saw that also increasing the product that we already had in chat, in that we were able to create pushes of information that we could send out during service contacts, increasing our blog, seeing our website as a service in itself. 2011 was a very big time for us, and also just able to look at data and make data-informed decisions was also played a huge role, and we'll talk a little bit about that more as we go on in the presentation.
As we also evaluated the expansion of our digital services, this was really kind of, this is right around the time when the Chris Brown and Rihanna media events were happening, and we started to see a massive spike in the number of people accessing our digital services, both through text and through, mostly through chat, and then moving forward into text as we launched that platform. And what we really saw is while we had targeted, a very basic chat service to a limited number of people, that system was open to the entire internet at large, and basically offering service to the entire country, the entire world, everybody on their internet, was not something that our current system architecture, hardware or software could handle. So it really kind of drove home the point for us that before us or anybody else should even consider offering these types of services, it's really critical to do a lot of self-evaluation of your systems, some discovery of how you want people to use the systems, and the expansion of the footprint of how you want to offer them. And that's also kind of what is highlighted in that text, in the technology assessment tool that we sent out earlier on the website. So the expansion of services basically for the hotline is after we saw this trend of an aging out, effectively, of that while the target for the Love is Respect site is 13 to 24-year-olds, we were seeing an older audience starting to access chat. At the time, we did not have chat on the Hotline website, which is an older property targeted at an older audience. In 2012, we decided to do a pilot test of chat to see if it would be embraced, how an older audience would use it, or an older demographic would use it, and where would be the best time to do it. In October 2013, we did launch chat officially and targeted 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time. And we had some interest, but prior to that, in this pilot, we had really looked at offering what we had called screen pops. And basically, there was, through our new improved chat system, we were able to take a look at what we identified as critical pages, or what we figured would be high crisis pages on the hotline.org, and then offered users who spent more than 30 to 90 seconds on a given page, it would populate a chat. You've probably seen this in various customer service organizations when you're trying to pay a bill or something like that online. It'll do a screen pop, and we did this pretty successfully initially as our pilot system. So we didn't have to open it all the way up to be an open chat, but it did provide a gateway to the service, and we've had some interesting results on that.
One of the biggest ones that came through is a woman contacted us that was at a local college, and this is the only thing that her husband allowed her to do. And the screen pop came up, and she actually clicked on it and said, I was actually just at your website looking at some information, and so when it popped up, I would have never reached out and contacted you unless you had given me this invitation. And what we found out was this is the only way that she was able to have access to any information talk, because unless she was at school, he was very controlling of her technology. He was very controlling who she could visit. And this just really kind of showed us that, the woman who was in her 40s, who was in a college computer lab, we knew that this was a project that was no more just something that we needed to kind of explore and see the work. We knew this is something that we needed to launch. And when we did launch this, originally it was at a smaller period of time. We didn't go 24/7 like we did on Love is Respect. And we'll talk a little bit about this. And I think this is as important in anything that you do when it comes to digital expansion. And I think that goes not just for chat or text messaging. What I think is you should think about anything that we launch digitally that we look with a small amount of time, and we say that we're going to open it for 3 to 4 hours, and you're going to gather data. Data was one of the biggest influencers in deciding how we were going to expand the services for the hotline. Many of you may or may not have or know about or have Google Analytics on your website. This is a free service that you can utilize, and what you can gather as far as like how your website is utilized, how people come in and use your site, you know, what's your highest volume times. These are things that are an example of things that are important to look at to decide when you're going to offer services so that you can get the return on the investment, which is one of the biggest things that we've also found when it comes to asking for money, is starting off very small and then expanding. And also the danger that we always tell people you run into is if you turn something on 24/7, it is very difficult to turn it off. We have found that when we have talked to smaller programs or even some coalitions that have asked us, hey, we want to start some digital services, we always tell them to think about what's your audience, you know, what age group, are they at work, are they young adults, and thinking about like maybe opening it up during lunchtime from 11 to 2, and just really piloting that for 6 months and seeing what happens and saying that we're upfront with your funder. We're not going to offer this 24/7, that we will give a return the information that we receive on this, and then we'll make more informed decisions based off of that. But any kind of technology is the best way we have found that people are willing to invest, but also it just protects you in the long run so that you're not responsible for trying. And the biggest thing for us was being responsible for staffing. The quality control became more difficult. So, and especially, I think we'll talk a little about this with text messaging. We actually found that text messaging, we've gone through 3 different platforms in 5 years, and a lot of that has to do with just the way that the industry goes, also usage. Text messaging is not as popular in the way that it was in 2010 and 2011, especially as you have Apple has their own text messaging platform that they utilize that does not require you to have use your cell phone plan. Also looking at the costs that are associated on the user end. These are things that we just kind of find out were things that we didn't think about, and then once you get in that 24 setting, it's very difficult to turn it off and adapt to those things. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
So we also, and there was a question from the audience about the Pew Internet American Life, and Brian's going to take a look for that right now. We'll get that added to the end of the, we'll get a link out for that one so that everyone can have a look at that. Part of what, just to add to that, I think that the pilot really showed us our users want to access our services on channels that they're comfortable with using, and it was a kind of a shift in mentality for the hotline for us to be able to say that we're comfortable letting this person evaluate their own safety and their own preference of use on how they're accessing their services. We're always going to inform them about safety. We're always going to make sure that we, advise them to clear the message, check on their safety before we begin services, and as we close out, we are going to safety plan with them. But at the end of the day, it's up to them if they want to use chat, text, or they feel more comfortable phone calling. The other revelation, I think, for us as an organization was that a lot of our users found chat to be a much more private interaction than phone call, and an easier interaction to test things out in terms of through the chat interface and through that particular communication dynamic. We also, and Brian mentioned our Google Analytics, we have relied heavily on that in terms to guide when we launch digital services. We have basically looked at high traffic times on the website to match our services to those times. So as opposed to going 24/7, because we are Central Time, we focused in October 2014 on 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. And that basically encompassed our most high traffic times on both coasts, that we could cover West Coast for a couple hours in the late evening and East Coast in the early morning. And please also, we'd love for this to be a dialogue, so please take questions. We're happy to take questions throughout this.
So what we were going to do is the video will work. So we have a video that just basically shows how our chat service works, wait to see if we can launch this really quickly, and then we'll go from there.
Using Hotline Chat is really simple for both chatters and advocates. Here, you'll be able to see both sides of that interaction. Let's start with the chatter's perspective. All they have to do is come to the hotline.org and click on the red chat button. This launches a chat window which explains our privacy policy and asks a few basic demographic questions. These include age, gender, race, and how they heard about our service. At times, we also include the option for the chatter to participate in a focus study. We often refer to this section as our pre-chat survey. As often as possible, we try to answer chats as soon as the chatter hits the Begin Chat button. Unfortunately, sometimes there is a wait, but chatters are given information about what place they are in line and an approximate wait time. In addition, if they're left waiting for more than 2 minutes, the system automatically sends them a link to resources that they can read through while they wait. Now we'll jump to show you what it looks like from the advocate's perspective. This is what the advocate chat console looks like. As new chats come in, they appear in the queue at the top of the screen. The advocate simply clicks the button to take the chat and immediately sends them our pre-scripted welcome response, which includes a reminder about our privacy policy and asks if they're safe to talk. While advocates are waiting for a reply from their chatter, they can actually see if the chatter is typing. Once the advocate establishes that the chatter is safe to talk, the advocate simply asks, "How can I help you today?" and the conversation flows from there. Throughout the course of the conversation, the advocate has access to basic information about the chat, as well as the chatter's responses to the pre-chat survey. Another important feature of chat services is the ability to send hyperlinks. Throughout each chat, advocates supplement their conversations by embedding links to pre-existing content, like our blog or other resources. Advocates even have the ability to see if the chatter opens up the link that they've sent. When the conversation comes to a close, the advocate sends a pre-scripted goodbye response, which asks the chatter to fill out a short survey. The survey allows chatters to give feedback about their experience with our service. At the end of a chat, advocates are also asked to log a few pieces of information about their conversation. And that's chat services. Thanks for watching.
The screen froze, so that's not. I think it needs to click back. So I think that fixing the screen, I think that's it's easier for us to kind of demonstrate that as than try to explain how chat works. I mean, if you've ever gone to our site, and like many of you, our site is designed in the way that we kind of set it up was so that we could have a good flow with when a person comes in and how they actually launch the chat and how they begin the process of talking with us, as well as this is a lot of learned lessons about letting people know, as you saw in there. We do tell people when we launch the chat that they're allowed to share a name. That's something they want. Some people do and some people don't. A lot of people are really okay with a lot of times answering many of the pre-chat survey questions that we ask with age, ethnicity. We have found that people are very much willing to share that information. In this next slide, you can see on the right, one of the things that we have also moved to is letting people know where they are in line. We've discovered that people are willing to wait. We've kind of looked at the metrics on this, that if you can tell people how long they have, that they'll wait up to, I believe it's like 10 minutes to get into a chat. And this is some of the same stuff that we've kind of looked at with phones, is that, you know, people just want to know their place. The one thing they can't deal with is just, hey, we'll get to you when we have a chance, or just constantly having a message play. So it has been, I think, when you're thinking about these services, I'm thinking about it in the sense of customer service, I guess is the best way to put it, that how people are introduced to your service, and also just aware of their time. This plays a huge role, especially digitally. A lot of times people will come, and depending on what their interaction is once with you will determine whether they will ever come back again. So we put a lot more effort to try to prepare our just how our services begin.
The other point we wanted to make here too is that we found this waiting room to be highly effective in terms of offering a series of crisis links, so or commonly requested resources from our site. So a lot of people may just be trying to chat with us, looking for our address or looking for the 1-800 number. So thinking about those frequently asked questions and that concept of call deflection and how we get to the most critical crisis chats first has been really critical in the evolution of the service over time. You also notice too from the video that again safety is a paramount consideration in any provision of these services, so that again we offer the safety assessment at the beginning, a safety planning during the crisis intervention, and a safety message at the end reminding them to use a safety device kind of per those guidelines that we hear about from other national safety partners.
And we'll get into a little bit more about this slide. Is just, we're going to talk a little bit about this later. As you can see at the top where it says the privacy policy, this is going to be something that we're going to come back to, that even if you're not in a place in which that you're ready to start doing any form of online services, thinking about your website and thinking about, do you have a privacy policy? And we'll go a little bit into depth about the things that need to be in there. But also, you know, I think especially this year we were at South by Southwest Interactive. You know, the transparency and privacy discussion is huge, even not just in the private sector, but in all sectors. And making sure that you're making people aware of what you're collecting and updating those types of things are extremely important. And that even just includes if you're tracking anything on your website, that type of information is very important. And also, it just gives people the chance to have information if they want to. It also becomes, I think, a legal protection, even outside of some of the against the violence against women, just in general. Just if you ever have, get subpoena for information or get questioned, it's a great way to kind of protect you. So we did want to show this one at the top about how you introduce the privacy policy.
And I would add too that our privacy policy is massively cribbed and stolen from other places around the internet, and we would like to encourage everyone and anyone to also steal ours. Please use it and appropriate it for your own uses. That's totally
We'll send that along to, we'll send our privacy policy out to everybody as well.
And our community guidelines.
So we're just going to go through just a few more things and just talking about before we start getting into kind of best practices around just kind of evaluation of your staff, of your organization to do digital services, but also just getting into kind of some of the things around the websites, which I think is a little bit more realistic for people to start with, to prepare yourself for digital services. I mean, as you can see, I mean, right now, this breakdown of race and ethnicity, this is not, to us, I think this is getting pretty steady. We did some work recently with Civis, which also does some data analysis, and you know, seeing how people use our services, our chat services is important. What we're trying to figure out now is how many people start with come in and start using chat and then eventually migrate towards phones, and what's the link to that? Because we do know that even when you start looking at a breakdown like this, understanding how people use services is something that we're trying to figure out right now. And also what this has helped us recognize is how do we need to start changing not just our website but our promotional materials to target specific groups. You know, I think this is also a fantastic way to start thinking about, you know, where do you do your advertisements. Wade can talk a little bit about some of our targeted approaches to advertising through Facebook, but also just in thinking about what platforms that you do use, and you know, what's the best way to attract people to interact with your services or become aware of it. That's another thing. So we've kind of, even on our social media, we have spent a little bit more time in thinking about, you know, how do we send out messages to attract certain groups, but also where should we place encouragement to utilize our service so that it can be more attractive to groups.
So, and to Brian's point about the targeted advertising, things like Facebook ads or Google ads specifically are relatively cheap, and as you can, and often you can find a grant to support that pretty easily, especially if you're looking at an underserved population. So our feel on this graph specifically is that African Americans are probably underrepresented based on this graph, and we really have taken an approach on our Facebook pages and whatnot to do targeted advertising to specific communities to make sure that that there's awareness of these services, that the pages are getting out and into people's feeds as appropriate.
Also, age. I don't think this is too much of a surprise either about who's utilizing our chat. What we have started to look at a little bit more is looking at the age of 54 and up. We do know that this is the highest growing group on social media, especially Facebook. And it was interesting, you know, one of the things is that we're also seeing to develop more content that's targeted towards this age group. We're actually talking to a consultant who was telling us that, you know, one of the highest growing groups around sexually transmitted diseases is older adults over 50 who are re-entering the dating world. And, you know, a lot of this growth in looking at social media, going online, having information that's targeted at this group so that they can, what she was pointing out is like they're re-entering relationships. They're starting to have problems and issues that we're seeing in people under the age of 25. And so a lot of that just requires you to think about not just what your service is, but thinking about your website content. You know, thinking about how you're going to get a lot of those posts, either that you do put on your blog, you know, what channel you're going to send it out, whether it's through Twitter, you know, are you going to try to actively, what hashtag are you going to use to try to get people to follow back? These are things that I think that have really not just affected our chat, but have made us think about our complete services in order to try to serve people best. So that's an example of something where I think that as you go through time and you look at age, a lot of times in thinking that just because one group is using it, looking at some of the other things that are out there to help you determine what do we need to in order to get a group of people who's maybe not as using the service as much, but also maybe that it's coming. So it's kind of getting prepared for those types of things. Let's check really quick and see if there's any questions that have come in. Wade is actually bringing that up on for us. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, we're having a technical issue here. Wade is not moving forward. Ah, there it is. Thank you. Here's just a graph of just some of the situations that we come in. Of course, I think victim survivors is always a group that we see a lot of times. What I will tell you that I think is interesting and we have found is when we launched Hotline Chat, one thing we have seen is that we do have teens and young adults who do utilize chat on that program. The difference is that a lot of them, for the most part, will contact us and say that they are chatting in regards to their parent or a loved one who's older. So even when they think about love and respect, they see that for themselves, but most of the young adults who have actually contacted us through Hotline Chat see that as something as for somebody who's older. So it was very interesting, I think, in seeing that, how people contact us as to how they use the two services. We have noticed more so on Love is Respect than on the hotline, abusive partners, young men and young women, they contact us to ask about healthy relationships, and a lot of times we actually find out that they are actually engaging in abusive behavior. And I think that is the one thing in thinking about digital services, whether you try to open up a program in which maybe you take questions from people. I think another great one that you can think about that our Love is Respect staff started doing was using Tumblr, and you can ask a question anonymously and then respond, is that these digital interactions allow people who are abusive to ask questions, and a lot of times not recognizing that they're being abusive. But I've been very surprised at the amount of young people who have questions about their own behavior and kind of know something's not right in the way they're behaving towards their partner. But offering that, I think it's a great way to take advantage of the perceived anonymity that you can have and ask these questions. And so that's one thing that has really kind of led us as we've moved into taking this information, how we've tried to change some of our social media so that we can also continue to create spaces for people to ask us questions. I think this slide is kind of self-explanatory. We do see that a lot of people, specifically digitally, we have found a lot more success in discussing sexual assault, specifically sexual coercion. We've developed some links that we can push out. People are just a lot more comfortable in discussing this over chat, and it's not really a surprise. And we talk about the invisible wall, and we talk about that people are more willing to toss something over the perceived invisible wall that you have in digital interactions because they can ask a question and there's just a little bit more control. And I always just refer back to talking about that. I remember in college I had a friend who had a sexual health issue, and this is about 98, 99, and I remember when he called and just the embarrassment of having to call and talk about this issue with someone, and then thinking about it now and how young people can talk about issues that are affecting them sexually, that adults can talk about it, because it feels like you're in a little bit more control. You're not committing when you have a digital interaction to say that you have to stay on the line because you don't want to be rude, or the tone of voice, or if you're a guy and you're calling about this and you're afraid that you're going to get a woman who's going to answer the phone. These types of things are eliminated. And I think specifically in the LGBT community, we're seeing a lot more people who are willing to reach out and try and see how we accept their questions. How much do we ask about what type of relationship they're in, or do we just immediately just take it as a legitimate relationship? And so I think that's been another group that we've continued to kind of see a rise in contacting us, especially on Love is Respect. But I think that perceived anonymity is just something that people really want. They want to be able to have more control, and that's why I think as we're moving more and more thinking about services beyond just chat, like how can people ask the question or get the information and not have to interact with somebody, but also just like whenever they have the control to end the session whenever they want, because for some reason it just think people just have a very difficult time, I think, when it comes to being on the phones and feeling like they lose control of it and have to follow it all the way through.
And this is also probably a very good time for us to acknowledge that there's a very large difference between a local program providing these types of services and sorry, I was just reading a question, between local programs using these services and how the difference is between dealing with clients directly as opposed to our service, which is more intake and referral. We have a question in asking if our phone stats reflect that African Americans don't typically use internet services to do a housing search, and if we're seeing similar stats as well in our phone stats. I would have to get back to you guys on that one, but we can definitely pull data and take a look at that.
I do want to say that one of the most important things that that is, I think, a con in chat, honestly, is just there is a limitation to what you can do. There's several things on here I think that just really talk about the advantages that you have in using it, and also just our advocates. But the reality is that anything online is a limitation, that you can't get people into service. A lot of the times when people do contact us, they want to be able to talk to a local program, and what we've had to try to do is try to go through the website of the local program and talk to them where they can find relative information to their situation. But the biggest thing is there is a point in which that person is going to have to call a local program. And so we've explained this to people all the time, that while we can have, if everyone had a chat program in the world, it still doesn't matter, because we still, when it starts coming down to doing an intake, when it starts coming down to really understanding and doing a thorough check of what their situation involves with children, how can we get to the shelter, where can we pick you up, those types of things are only able to be done through phones, and we are working on a way in which that we can connect our chat to phone, in which you can do a click to call. We know that people are more likely to click a phone number if it's pushed to them, and so that's something that we've been working on to try to improve. The other thing is that we still follow the crisis intervention model in digital services. We have adapted it a little bit to kind of work in a flow with the chat, especially that you have to be a little bit more direct in these digital interactions. Mostly because a lot of times when people come in, you need to try to get them to get to the point that they're trying to ask. A lot of times we'll send a lot of text, and so focusing and recognizing of what the platform is and focusing that you can only do what is the most important thing. A lot of times the advocate is a little bit more direct in questions that they ask, and also displaying empathy is still possible, but there is a way that we've kind of discovered using kind of a three-step process to kind of reflect back what we've heard, give validation, and empathy, and then kind of move into asking a more direct question to try to hone in on what exactly is going on.
So we've got some questions from the crowd, and these are great, guys. Please keep them coming. The first question was, do we find people access chat more often than the phone hotline? The easy answer on that is no. We do. The phone is still by far our #1 channel of contact. I would say it's maybe we take about 5,000.
I think right now, if you look at our chat on a year breakdown, our chat and our digital contacts constitute about 1/3 of all of our service contacts. Before Ray Rice happened, we did see we were starting to see a decline yearly in hotline calls. I think what you're seeing now is that chat for the hotline is going up, and I do think it's going to surpass Love is Respect significantly in the next few years. And a lot of that, I think, just has to do with, people are going to work, they're able to have a little bit of time to kind of learn about the issue, and they spend time doing the chat specifically between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. We see a high usage of that, and then we see a high usage, especially before people go home. We just continue to see those areas are constantly growing, where with young adults, the busiest times really are after 5 p.m. and 4 p.m. on East Coast and Central Time. But I think also that we've made our chat much more accessible on mobile phones. So I do think that that's also increased why people have used it. But right now, phone still dominates.
We also have a question about staffing. How many advocates staff chat at any one given time? So our digital call center right now, this month, can accommodate up to 20 people. We are moving to a new facility at the end of April that will actually have upwards of 50, can accommodate up to 50 staff. That number obviously varies through different times of the day, and again, this is back to our soapbox on using data to predict staffing. This really gets critical in terms of looking at usage patterns and applying staff to the correct place.
We try to have at least one supervisor about every 7 to 8 people who are on the floor who are constantly watching chats and looking at that. So
we had a question about trafficking as to if we're getting a significant number of chatters trapped in human trafficking. We see some. We've
seen some, and this is also something that we actually had a trafficking roundtable discussion a year ago in which we brought together both Polaris, the Runaway Safe Line, as well as ourselves. And one of the things that we discussed is that we're having a lot of difficulty in identifying what type of trafficking. So what we have really tried to move to between all of our organizations is defining the difference between sex trafficking and work and labor trafficking. And so we've made, all of us have made an effort to try to share the same exact definition. And we've just recently done that, I would say, in the last 3 to 4 months, that we've started utilizing these new definitions. So it's actually something we're going to have more data on. In about another 2 months, we'll have 6 months worth to look back on. It also involved a lot of training, what to look for. But up to this point, we had a lot of difficulty in identifying it. And I mean, we would always get those chats where you could kind of get that feeling, but it was very difficult to get people to talk about it because they didn't exactly understand it. And a lot of people will come in and identify in sex trafficking a lot of times whether it's their John or their pimp, they'll see them as a relationship. And so we did see a lot of them come in digitally as, I'm in this relationship with this person. And you kind of always thought, was it sex trafficking? But we've done some things to be able to get better data, and we'll be able to report that this year.
We also have a question about language access. Are all chats in English? At this time, we are only offering chat in English. We are in the exploratory phase of offering Spanish chat. Obviously, there are ways to do that from a technology perspective with natural language systems. Our take on that was there was probably not likely going to be a robot good enough to do the translations for us, so we really want to have a staff in place for that.
And the three things that we look at with that particularly is A, even the private sector is not moving into offering Spanish chat because there's not enough research to support it. Also, most of the users that they have are not asking for it. A lot of people who do, when they have looked at it, when we've gone to conferences, they've said that, well, people appreciate the marketing in Spanish when they do. A lot of young adults who are bilingual still choose to use English when they choose to go online. The other thing is staffing. You have to be able to have a staff that is able to write in Spanish that is kind of universal Spanish that can be accepted, and then also to manage that requires you to also have a different type of management. I know Rain has done chat in Spanish, but their entire call center when it comes to chat is now bilingual. So that's something that they chose to do because it was very difficult otherwise to be able to route, to handle it. And that's the kind of thing is that when people come in, how do you route it?
We got two more questions, and then we're gonna move on a little bit here. So some advice for small rural programs. What are two, three pieces of advice for small programs with only a handful of staff? These operations can be very staffing and resource intensive, and I think going back, my chief takeaway for any program that's starting small would be to limit your hours and to limit the scope of your service. So, and that can be a little heartbreaking. If you're only going to serve your particular county or your particular municipality, then you may have to deny services or to somebody from outside that service area because you don't have the staff equipped or prepared to help them. And then the limiting of the hours as well is if we 24 hours is a beast, and you do not want to tackle that right out the gate.
One thing that we have talked about is that a lot of programs have asked us about, which it makes complete sense, is utilizing text messaging specifically for like people wanting to start a conversation or just reach out. One of the things, some of the parameters that we've encouraged small rural programs is if you choose to do that, buy one phone that is an agency phone that has to be checked out. That phone should be checked out the same way that you check out a case file. The person who takes it out needs to keep it on them, and just like if it's a case file, you don't leave it on the dashboard, you don't leave it in the seat of the car. You know, if you go to lunch, you know, you keep it in your pocket, but then it needs to be checked back in after a certain time of the day. And so when you do use that phone or that number, when you post your materials, you specifically state that it is operating from this time to this time. And then you have to have a way that you're recording what is said in those interactions and then deleting those interactions afterwards. So that is one way that we've talked to some rural programs to, instead of going out and buying a system, if you're going to do it, the best thing is probably just to buy a plan and on one phone, and then that is the phone that the agency uses on certain times and is kept under lock and key. We think is the best way to kind of provide, and that's the thing that I really want to encourage is to start looking at your staff and how many of them are utilizing their personal phones in services, and a lot of it's done just out of, we have really smart staff and that are trying to do the best they can, but a lot of times, a lot of those conversations and interactions can come back to haunt us and kind of bite us in the long run, and so having a way for people that they are going to involve in text messaging, having a company phone is the best way, especially in that it never leaves the building.
And we also, it's important to remember that we tend to lump chat and text into the blanket category of digital services, which for the purpose of this conversation is fine, but there is a distinct difference between chat and text in that chat is a synchronous conversation, whereas text may be asynchronous, meaning that you may start the conversation and it may be 25 minutes before somebody gets a reply, but the expectation is you're continuing that conversation. It means that the services can go, provided via text, can go on and on for quite some time, even after maybe the advocate has concluded, and there's an expectation for expectation for that conversation to continue and not start fresh. So there's a lot of considerations with regards to text that need to be taken very carefully. I'll jump ahead a little bit here, and we do have some slides down the road about text messaging platform, but just a real quick explanation. We do use a platform and a short code. So for us, it does not come into a phone number. Our messages are, we scramble the numbers inbound, so we never actually have personally identifiable information in the form of a phone number. Basically the way this works is you text love is to 22522, and it starts an interaction through the computer for the advocate. So we never actually deal with a cell phone system. For us, that's a little hairy for when it comes to confidentiality. And we will get to more stuff about text messaging down the road, as well as some mistakes and stuff that we learned from other programs.
So moving on to the next one, here's just some quick survey that we do at the end of our chats. For the most part, people are satisfied with the service. We have about 16% participation in this survey, which is considered statistically excellent. Also, we are currently involved in an evaluation of all of our services, including chat, through George Washington University in Washington D.C. Which was this evaluation was asked by Congress and through HHS and the PIPSA office. So we will have a published document in the coming year about the first portion of the evaluation that we'll be sending out. We're also then going to start getting into a little deeper dive into like satisfaction beyond that, but like how do people utilize, like what kind of word choices do they use to be able to describe satisfaction, whether that's through our social media, in posts to blog, in posting back to blog posts, and also just in the chats in general, like what types of words, how can we show that maybe people have come to increased knowledge.
One thing to add here is that this is a great example of how you can make the data collected from digital services work for you. If you have a high level of satisfaction in the services you're providing, that looks fantastic on a grant application, and it looks fantastic as a report back to your funders. So that can be a critical benefit to providing these types of things.
It's also important, I think, to think about surveys that you can utilize on your website. If you don't necessarily have to have surveys through a chat like we have, but we do a lot of surveys through the website, especially with the amount of business that we get. And Wei can talk about there's several services that you can utilize in that, but it's a great thing to kind of throw up, and especially before you do anything. It is better to have at least a place in which someone has come to you on a digital channel and actually ask some questions before you move forward on something, which is something that we've really come to realize is more powerful than to just take a guess after a couple of contacts that we've had through our chat or phones and moving forward on it.
So one example might be if you're a program considering launching digital services, you may want to survey users on your Facebook page and say, would you use a chat system? Would you use a text system? Survey Gizmo, Survey Monkey, both are good services that provide cheap, if not free, levels of service that you can gather information. And it doesn't have to be an extensive survey, but having a good, solid base of user testing can really play a large role in your larger strategic thinking about how you would roll out digital services, when you would do it, and what audience you should be targeting. And also even help you understand as an organization what the issue looks like in your area and how you can provide better services overall.
So I think that, in thinking about the written word, I think this is also kind of self-explanatory. Like the way you write has a large part to do with how you are able to convey empathy, validation, but also just being present in conversation. We especially talk about this, that whatever you do, even if you're writing on your website, thinking about the word choices that you use play a huge role in whether people want to utilize your programming, but also it's a lot easier, I think, to a lot of times, especially when you're writing this out, you may need to hire somebody to write. And one of the things that when we look back at, and we'll talk a little bit about the pushes that we use, we have some pre-written service pushes that we push out in chat. Having someone who is well-versed in writing professionally is a lot of times that can be one of the best things that you can do. to make sure that it's done well, and reviewing the types of things that you've written, coming back to it. We use a 3-part statement that I talked a little bit about, and we utilize this when somebody comes in. We validate what the person has written. We clarify, so we'll ask a few questions. Is this exactly what you were saying? And then you ask a question next to say, like, so if this is what you talked about, are you ready to leave? Being more direct when you in chat services has been something that we've had to do, as I talked about. But a lot of this too is just in how we've written a lot of the content on our website has really been designed to be used in service. So making sure that it's well written, that it's very succinct and to the point. There's nothing worse than seeing a wall of text in a chat, but there's also nothing worse than going to a website and having too much text. Getting very to the point and succinct in all of this is important, but that you recognize that a lot of times that when people come, they're really just wanting a very quick answer, and you're not being on the website. By having short pieces is not a bad thing. It's easier to change them out, but also when you start engaging in digital services, being more to the point is also because the attention span of young people, we've realized, is a lot difficult to keep up and keep them on point with that, but also even in talking to adults, they have so much time that they have on a lunch break, or they're sitting in a computer lab like talking about, or they're about to go home, so being able to be to the point is it's huge. And then as I was talking about those links to the pre-written links, we really recognized that that was necessary, and so if you ever go to Love is Respect and see how much content we have, breaking up or going on spring break, a lot of that was designed because when we were talking to people, they'd come and say like, hey, I'm in this relationship, my partner pushes me against the wall, I just want him to stop, and we'd say, have you ever thought about leaving? I don't want to talk about leaving, I just want to talk about how to stay. That really resulted in us writing pieces about how to leave safely, talking to them about like what are the most important things that you need to know when you are leaving. Our sexual coercion posts, our gaslighting posts, those things were used because a lot of times in these conversations, because they're very quick, because they're to the point, we'll send somebody a link and saying like, well, if you ever do want to break up, here's a post we encourage you to look at, which is a hyperlink that's sent through the chat, through the text messaging that they can open up. And what that allows the person to do is to look at it later, to come back to it, but it also doesn't waste valuable time that we're not focusing on what the person is contacting us about. And this was a bit of a change, I would say, for our advocates, but it really is in thinking about the victim as the customer in the sense of like, this is what they want to talk about, but also it's the equivalent of the digital pamphlet that you're sending them. Here's some more information that if you have time to look at later that you can keep with you. The other thing that's been very helpful for us too is that this is stuff that we started to track. So we started tracking how many times people look at specific parts of our content, whether we sent it out or whether it's on the website, and this has also been stuff that's informed us. Maybe it's time to go ahead and rewrite this piece because no one looks at it. Also, it's helped us to learn by looking at things that, not just about how many times people looked at it, but how much time individuals spend looking at it. A perfect example of that is that the most visited part of our website is actually the definitions of abuse. More people go to that, but they spend, I think, it was something like less than 20 seconds on that page. And then one of the least trafficked, but the most time was spent on it was between like 6 and 10 minutes, was actually how to leave an abusive relationship. So when you start getting into your website and really thinking about it, it also requires you to kind of sit down and think like, why are people going to these pieces? Do they need to be rewritten? And also, or are we just looking at this wrong? So that's another thing that we've kind of learned by thinking about the links of information we have and when we're sending them out to the chat.
So Brian and Wade, this is Deidre, and I wanted to just check in right quick and ask you a little bit about, I figured at some point we were going to discuss ways that abusers may use technology to monitor or to control, stalk, or harass survivors. Are you going to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, we can actually touch on that a little bit right now. I think, you know, the biggest thing that I think it's time to start thinking about is that whenever you utilize any services or whatever you have, is that the days of just saying that someone's going to put information, not information, is going to put a service that's going to track somebody, that stuff is already preloaded on your phone. We talked about several years ago how if you have an Apple phone, that it comes already attached with the Find My Friends app on it, and that a lot of the times we have really encouraged programs to think about approaching their community and holding, if you have an event, to have a session in which you'll sit outside and you'll make people aware about how to set privacy settings, to sit down and talk about, do you know if you have an Android phone, if you have an iPhone, here are some of the things that come preloaded that you should be aware about to check and look at. The other thing that a lot of times that we've been spending a lot of time in this is really, we all know this is social media, but the check-ins, and that a lot of times that people, we're spending a lot of time, especially in healthy relationships, and specifically with adults online. One of the things that we talk to them about is making them not just aware of their privacy settings, but also just the dangers in general of checking in, period, or asking about this. A lot of people don't really see their digital lives the same as their personal lives, and so if someone says like, hey, can you just check in so I know you're there, a lot of people don't always separate that. We found out on contacts that that's something that they don't have to do, or that record exists. Even such things as the mapping functions, I believe, on Instagram that you're able to turn off, which if any of you have ever gone to that, you can see that you can drill down almost to the street of where somebody was when a picture was taken. And so we've tried in our safety planning, we've spent a lot more time making victims aware of ongoing how to check back up on their privacy settings, but also in the safety planning of when we leave, we actually spend between 5 to 10 minutes in just talking about their digital safety, because that is one thing that we have found that really comes back to bite people is that they get out, they leave, but then they didn't adjust their Facebook page. They didn't look at their Instagram. Also in navigating the fact that a lot of times with phones that they still have things that are still linked through the operating system back to them. So I think that when you're talking to victims, telling them just to maybe take their computer to the police office to have it scanned is not enough, because even on your computer, I do believe that Apple still links all those things back to their operating system, where you can still simultaneously call your phone, your iPad, and your computer. And I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that in regards to the operating system, but that's something that I don't think is going to change in the future anyway.
I think from a large perspective, and again, I would encourage anybody who does have questions about digital abuse to check out the NNEDV Safety Net project. They are typically who we will refer to in these types of situations. But from a real broad perspective, your cell phone is a GPS for the most part. Those location services are going to default to be turned off. Facebook, Instagram, whatever new social media hitness the kids are using today, it's going to have a location baked into it. So it's really critical when you are working with survivors to, as part of these services, to think about what's our harm reduction strategy that we can use here to make sure that we can not take the draconian measures of just throwing out the phone. Some of these services and channels are an asset and a necessity for people, but how do we take that strategy and make sure that we have the settings correct, with the understanding that the device is a risk and the device could have malware put on it. I think the broader, from a strategy perspective, one thing that you can do is you can always do a default on a device. You can take it back to its factory settings. Most of the time that will take care of a lot of software, but it won't always get it. So it really becomes an issue of, if you do suspect some kind of cyber stalking, it's likely the device is if the device is compromised, then there's not really a way to 100% be certain that you can get rid of that compromising malware or software.
The other thing too is a lot of victims do not realize that perpetrators are getting a lot smarter in recognizing that even if you post a picture, there's a built-in GPS location directly into the picture, which is not difficult. In fact, you can go to websites, and if you enter in a picture, it can actually break down where a picture was taken, where the location is. So one of the things that we've also tried to tell victims too is that if they're going to maintain their phone, try not to post any pictures. Try not to, whether it's, and it doesn't matter whether your privacy settings are set up. You know, if the abusive partner is friends with other people and maybe they go online and they look and they find that picture, getting that picture and then being able to identify the location has become very easy, and it's all, a lot of effort is taken out of it by a lot of the websites that will actually do all the work for you.
Okay, Brian and Wade, we had a couple of questions that we wanted to ask you.
Yeah, sure.
One is, hi, this is June. On the slide that's up, use a platform is highlighted in red. I have a feeling some of the programs don't really understand what that is. You touched on it earlier about scrambling the information, the incoming information, so you're not tracking phone numbers and stuff. But if you could just expand on what that important use a platform bullet is about. And then also the specific details of safety planning around digital stuff. Is there a nice list that advocates can use to make sure they're covering all their points when they're doing digital safety planning with their clients?
Or do they go back into the phone screen?
Yeah, and we can totally put together the one that we have our advocates look at, that we can put that and send it out to the group. Specifically on the use of platform, when we talked about utilizing a cell phone, and we've encouraged people to, if they have to use that in a rural setting, it's okay to use that if it's all your choices are. Why we have chosen to use a platform is because it's deleting information. Your biggest thing is, as a program, is the amount of information that you sit on that has some private information, and that means that if you have an IP address, if you utilize anything on a phone, you cannot enter into services without having some form of a breadcrumb trail that leads back. And so one of the things that we have done by utilizing platforms is that we have the people who utilize, who provide our chat services, we actually delete everything that we have once a year, but then we also delete it every 3 months. So they do a big delete at the end of the year just to go back and check everything, but we also will go to them and ask them to manually delete stuff every 3 months. And this is in an effort to make sure that we don't keep any information. One of the things that we have tried to tell programs that we're starting to run into is that law enforcement is, the old guard is starting to age out, and many of the new young law enforcement officers who are moving into investigative roles are much more aware now that there are IP addresses, and they're becoming much more specific in what they ask for directly. And so we've been working with our policy people in DC to kind of prepare for this, that it is much more difficult to keep information without having a timeline of when you delete it, and also then baking this into your privacy policy. It's not just to tell users what you collect and what you look at, but also your process for eliminating information, because these are the things that when it comes down to court issues, when it comes down to subpoenas, that you can say that we list publicly when we delete our information and when we get rid of things.
And just to add, when we're talking about a platform, typically we're talking about a web service. In our case, we have two separate services that we're utilizing. One is called LivePerson. That's our chat platform. We've been using LivePerson since 2011, which is a very long time to be on one platform. It's one of the best practices that we're seeing emerging. It is very, very critical that you reevaluate your platforms on a scheduled basis. The other piece that we utilize is a combination of a platform called Twilio and OneReach, and Polaris Project, National Human Trafficking Hotline, also uses this platform. That's what provides the texting service. So when you saw the video earlier of LivePerson, that's what we mean when we're saying using a platform there. When we don't have a demo of the current text platform because, as Brian mentioned, we did just recently change it, but it's a very similar interface. And what that allows you to do is make sure that the information is scrambled, make sure the privacy protections are in place, and also remove it from a device-based interaction. So you don't run the risk of that device being compromised either physically or technologically.
One of the things that also when you start working with a lot of these, and we'll send this out to everybody, one of the things that we actually designed too, that we start working with, whether it be a new database, whether it be working with someone who's going to come in and create a platform that you're going to use is sending them a one-pager on the violence against women with specific legal information and definitions of what we can and cannot collect. We can send that out to everybody as well. But the other thing that a lot of times that people are not aware of is the Children's Online Privacy Act. And so when you begin to engage in these services, many years ago this was written mostly to be able to avoid solicitation of minors under the age of 13 to have information sent out or being called if they have a cell phone, to have information collected from this so that they can put them into a database to call them back. But it's Children's Online Privacy Act is for anybody under the age of 13. You are not allowed to capture any information from that group. So if you do a text blast, or if you say to join into our text messaging program, or if you're one of those things where you're just going to do text blasts, that type of stuff is actually against the law. And so we've had to make sure that we're aware of making sure that when people do ask to use our services, asking if they are under the age of 13. If they do say they're under 13, then we have to terminate this session.
A question. Just thinking about how I used to work in a shelter program and folks would come to our program or the community program and some smaller programs, we kind of just want to know, how is it possible to assist clients in disabling tracking on their phones? I mean, I know they show up with their phones. Sometimes their kids will have phones too. So how do we assist folks who are showing up that we might not have these platforms available within our agency, but how do we assist them one-on-one on disabling tracking on their phones?
So it's going to vary from device to device. On your initial sorry, 1 second here. For your basic Apple device, you do have the option to flash the phone and take it back to its factory default settings, as long as you have the password to access the device. Mm-hmm. If you do not have it, then it's pretty difficult to do that. You can take these devices back to a provider store, and they can do a variety of services and checks on them. I will say that the Android platform has been known to have more malware out in the wild that could potentially be used for tracking. There's a real nasty one a couple of years ago that was almost impossible even after the device was completely wiped to get rid of. But my first step in any of these would be to take the device to a AT&T or an Apple store, if there's one nearby, or just the cell phone provider, to get them to basically run a reset of the device. And most of the time you will see them be pretty accommodating that, and they have the expertise to do that. The other option, of course, is to look at different phone options and starting fresh. But keep in mind, anytime that you run a restore to that device, whatever tracking piece is baked into the old phone will be transferred to the new phone. So even if you get a completely new device, if you restore it from a backup, you still run the risk of compromising the security of that phone. It's really, I would say, to be completely frank, it's not an easy task to make sure that you're troubleshooting all these phones. It does require a high level of technical expertise. There are some basic options you can do by just turning off the GPS, but that isn't going to account for the triangulation that can occur off cell phone towers, which there is software out there that can accommodate that as well. So cell phones it's a risk, and I think that in terms of having advocates or local program folk look at how they can disable that, I would highly recommend that you either make sure the device is completely powered down, or you take it to an expert and have them take a look at it. And I know that, and I fully understand that expertise may not be available in all areas.
Right, Wade, this is June again, back at the Coalition. We understand that advocates will need to be highly trained on stalking and tech stalking and digital safety, and also know how to assess the people that they're serving, at what level they're being stalked, especially digitally. And like you mentioned, it takes a high level of tech expertise to be able to work these phones. A lot of us can barely work our phones as it is, especially when factor in children, right? The kids have phones and such. So I think your suggestion of just having, for people we know that are being stalked, to literally have them take their phones back to their service provider and have the tech there do it, rather than worry advocates about learning all this information about how to do it at the shelter, at the community programs, etc. Would you agree with that?
I think I think that that's the best way to do it. I think the one thing that if you're a program, I think what you can do is you can lightly talk about, and it's ridiculous to think that people are going to delete their social media. I will say is that shelters should maybe develop a protocol on how much they do an introduction, that if you do come in the shelter, here are some of the recommendations. If you're going to do a Facebook post, here's how you don't include somebody. If you want to post a picture, there is a way to post it and not include a specific person. Or if there's people that, because it would be more dangerous to delete the person from your social media, to just go in and make it so that they can't be able to see any postings that you put or specific things. Those are things that I think are reasonable to do, and I think it's more in the sense of like best practices. But when you start talking about your device, it's too complex at this point. And to take that on also, the one thing that we also have told people is that the liability, that if something does happen and you say that you gave them that you told them how to get things off their phone, it's just better to say that you asked them to go to the local store, or to go to an expert in that works with that particular phone, whether it's go to the Apple store or go to the AT&T store. It also protects you as an organization. That's another thing that we really recommend. Outside of just recommendations about interactions on social media, that's the best way to protect yourself.
I agree, and I also think that, I've worked with stalking victims in the past who very, very few of them literally need to go offline completely. I think there's a level of finding out what's reasonable and what is safe for that person, as opposed to telling this person not to have Facebook, not to have Instagram, not to Snapchat, all that. So just to be aware, and I think as organizations, just doing that training with the advocates about really doing a solid assessment of their stalking victims of, not everybody is a level 10, right? So I just think this kind of puts the onus back on us as service providers on the information we put out there for them to choose, but also to not have every stalking victim be a 5-alarm fire.
We will also say that a lot of times one of the things that we hear on the calls is that people will say, if I have to give up my phone, I don't want to go. And we do know that is a major reason why people, our lives are in our phones now. And to say that somebody can't use a phone or has to delete things is just not possible anymore. Again, NNEDV does have some great stuff too that we kind of utilize with them, our safety net project, and Cindy's actually got some good stuff out now too, especially on when people bring personal computers as well as iPads that do have videos about how those things. One of the things I think that we need to make sure at the very least is covering up the video camera. We do that on a lot of our computers here just because the information is really quite surprising how you can activate and not even know that somebody's using your video camera.
And that is true on tablets as well as tablets, phones, and laptops. And we had a question from the audience, what is the name of the federal law on contacting children via technology? It's the Children's Online Privacy Act. I think there might be another P, but there's COPA.
Yeah.
So there's some good primers online for that one.
We'll also send that out to everybody as well.
And this is Deidre. I wanted to ask a question about, I don't know what other programs might have already implemented some digital services in their programs, but if they have, can you talk about any mistakes they might have made in trying to start this process and they didn't really maybe think it through all the way? What were some of the mistakes that they might have made in implementing this?
There's a couple of them. I think specifically, we did some work out in the East. And one of the programs is they just launched a program without actually looking at their staff was not ready to launch into digital services. There wasn't enough education on how to use the digital services the digital tools that they had in their office prior to doing that. Doing an assessment of your staff. One of the things is you may not have the right people at your organization to provide those services, and you may need to hire those people from the beginning. I think also just assuming that every single person that comes into tech services, that when you launch out of every single person that works at your organization, just saying that they're just going to add this to their duties is also another mistake, because a lot of people do not feel very confident when it comes to working with that. And we've actually, when we launched our chat program, that's one of the things that we found out was we actually did hire a lot of digital natives to begin with, because it was a very different approach to advocacy. And so I think doing an overall tech assessment of your organization is one of the most important things that you should do before you move forward on any of this. And that's providing an anonymous survey, which you can ask you questions. We can probably send out the questions that we utilized previously with our tech assessment that you can just send out anonymously, whether it's through SurveyMonkey. I think the other part too that's really important is if you're going to go in the direction once you've had the information is what are the tools that you already have, like can your computer support this? We've talked to some programs that want to move into digital services and their computers can't even support the platform. So that's another thing in taking into account just what are the systems, what's the inventory that you have, and also what will the workflow look like?
I think after we launched digital services in 2011 and 2012, we undertook an internal technology and tech assessment audit that kind of was the impetus for writing the page that we shared at the beginning of this webinar. I think what's critical to understand, and what we see a lot of programs maybe not quite getting right away, is that your IT becomes a service at that point, and when you launch digital services. And when you have an outage, it's not just an inconvenience that you can't get into the VPN or the file server. It becomes a criticality of your services that can't be accessed. And as your services grow, that criticality grows. And so it's very important to operate with the understanding that this is important, that the technology pieces are important, that having a life cycle and an expectation of when your hardware is going to be replaced is important. And I know that's not necessarily an easy thing for smaller programs to consider, but it is something to consider before you take on any kind of digital services as to what is going to be that backbone and how is it going to be facilitated. And I would say that is the number one thing we've seen is a lack of assessment before going into these types of services. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. And there was a question. I just want to respond to someone who asked about about understanding the audio. Let's see. They said, I wonder if it's advisable to ensure shelter location remain confidential by asking that everyone's locator on their phones be deactivated. My response to that is you can ask folks to do that, deactivate their locators on their phones. Not sure everyone will do it. Two, everyone's not going to know how to do it. And if you're not helping folks and showing them how to turn that off, they might not know how to actually deactivate that service. And then some folks might want it turned back on. So also teaching them how to turn that service back on is part of that process. So I would, and I also think when there's, when you're talking about confidential locations for shelters and shelter programs, that could be just one way someone could find them, but I honestly think that it would probably come from a different source. So
it's getting increasingly difficult to remain confidential. We know that if you Google a lot of shelters, it's coming up. In fact, we were in one city. We actually Yelped the shelter, and they actually had reviews about their interactions. So I mean, I think that's just kind of the world that we're living in now. And none of us are ready for that. I think that this is also we're really starting to see this with people under the age of 24, because checking in, that stuff is just so ingrained, and in thinking like that is just how people have come up. And I know that there's currently a lot of shelters in a program that have been published. At the hotline, what we try to do is whenever we've ever talked about this, if we moved in this direction, we would try to call individual programs and ask if that's what they want to, if that's something that they would want to participate in. However, mostly you can Google every single program and it comes up in that way, so it's going to be very hard, I think, to be able to maintain that.
Judy's going to say something.
Hi, folks. Just back to the question around the shelter location. I think this is a great, just as our national experts here are telling us, we're moving into an era where we may not be able to keep locations confidential just because of technology and Google Maps. And I think many of us have had that experience of having the location and even the photo of the front door of the shelter and its street location published online. And so this is why, we've been doing a lot of work here at the coalition, supporting programs to think about how can we have more security, and that's not the same thing necessarily as confidentiality of location, that there may be other ways to secure your location. And I just want to, hats off, acknowledge all the rural programs where it's been very hard, and many of our rural membership don't have confidential locations or secret locations because everybody knows where the shelter is in that town anyway.
Yeah.
Wade and Brian, I wanted to just ask if you could say a little bit more about how programs might start incorporating safety planning, the technology awareness and safety planning. So I'll just say, like, a lot of the things that you've been talking about are terms that I've heard of, but I'm not exactly sure what they mean. So for those of us who are edging towards 50 or over, so I like the checking in, like that check-in thing, that I think that's where you go on, what is that, June?
Facebook, Instagram.
That's where people say where they are, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
I'm not even sure where I am, so yeah. Okay.
Well,
So just
I think
stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that, like, I'll take Instagram as a perfect example. There's a badge of a lot of people choose to have the locating, where if you actually go to the front screen, you can actually, there's a location button that's at the fourth one on the third one on the bar above the pictures. A lot of people see that as like a badge of honor, like these are all the places that I've posted photographs. And when you click on that, you can actually see if it's enabled that you can drill all the way down to a street level to exactly where the picture was taken, including what you figure that with the date can cause some problems, especially with the victim. There is a way to turn that off, and so going into the privacy settings on Instagram, one of the things that we also talk a little bit about with Facebooking is that while a lot of people are like, Facebook is old, it's not old for older people. A lot of people who are the day that I received that invitation from my mother on Facebook was the day that I freaked out, and that, she is now connecting with people, interacting, and one of the things that we even talked about is like, older people are starting to date again, whether their partner has passed away or they've gotten divorced. They don't understand the settings, and so checking in and stuff like that is stuff that a lot of people do find is like really cool things to be able to tell a timeline of what they've done for the year. And I think especially with a lot of the social media that is now doing like year-end reviews of your life, a lot of people get really excited about this stuff, but it comes back to hurt you later on, and so participating in those things become a problem.
I'll add to that in that, so when we're talking about checking in can happen in two ways. Basically, it's going to take the phone's either GPS or, as I mentioned earlier, the triangulation from the cell phone towers and give an approximate location, or even Wi-Fi can also give location. So if the phone's on, it can attach a location. There are ways within the operating system level to disable location services. On an Apple phone, it's relatively easy. You just flip it and it turns off. On an Android phone, again, that ecosystem is a little more complex in terms of what's out there and the varieties of hardware and phones that you see. So in some places that's going to be a little trickier to do, so I would default to an expert on turning that on and off. The other thing to consider is that the cameras they attach what's called an EXIF file to every image, and EXIF data is basically, it's designed to tell a computer how the photo was taken. So the film speed, the time of day, things like that. It's basically metadata for the photo, but they have now started attaching location data to it. So even your camera can betray your location if you're not careful. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, and there was a note from someone who just said that The folks at Zillow are hosting a tech volunteer nonprofit matching fair soon, and they are looking for nonprofits to bring the ask to the tech community. This is a great opportunity for agencies in Seattle who feel they are lacking in the technical experience, expertise that can help them with the process. Pretty sure the application for this is due by next week. So, and that was from Dana.
Hi, this is
Go ahead.
sorry, this is Judy. I wanted to just thank everyone who is sending some great technology safety resources in, and we will figure out a way to send those links. I can't tell if other people can, if only the sender can, if those went out to everyone on the call. So if they haven't, we'll figure out a way to share those, and thanks to Dana and Liz and Maria and other folks.
So I know we didn't get to all the slides in this presentation in the time that we had allotted, and we want to save some time here for more questions. We will assemble a list of our COPA guidelines, the VAWA guidelines we use for working with vendors, and some other resources that we mentioned on the call, and put them. We have the slides up now at the bit.ly link shown there on the slide next to the picture of us. And we will add these resources into that PDF and make it just a zippable that everybody can download. And we're also open for other questions offline. If you want, feel free to email us directly. We'd be happy to help.
If there's any questions now, we'd be more than happy to answer them.
And I did want to just to kind of reiterate that what I thought was really helpful is that if programs are really considering doing some of this technology support and these chats, what it sounds like to me is the first thing that really folks need to pay attention to is, can their system support that? And I just know, I know a lot of programs are still working in the dark ages when it comes to computers and phones and TTYs and folks and stuff like this. Yes, Judy. It does really require us to bring our technology services up to date, which also costs more money. So if this is something folks are thinking about, I think that would be the first place to start to even determine whether or not your services could handle the volume of calls or the calls that you're getting. And then also the survey. I think the survey is so important because you really want to know what your community wants. You want to know what folks are needing, and you want to meet those needs. You don't want to go backwards. You want to start from what people are really asking for, and answer their questions and support them where they're at. And then making sure there's enough staff to handle the calls, to handle the questions, to support that. And like I said at the very beginning of this webinar, it's a webinar. I'm sitting at my desk, but literally it's taking 5 of us to do this. We are really working this out here. It's you would think we had magic wands, but no, it takes time. It takes work to really understand how things process, and you got to have the staff to do that. And then also having folks with different languages is really, really key. I heard you guys mention that. And then making sure you erase data so that you're not subpoenaed. And when it comes to survivors, we all know how important it is that our information, our information, doesn't get out to the community, to the public. It should stay confidential, and we want to make sure that happens with this information.
The other thing I think that's important too is getting somebody on your board that will represent your technology needs. A lot of times it can be, there are a lot of technology vendors out there. There are people, mom and pop shops that do technology, whether it's support. Having someone on your board that just is in technology is one of the most important things that we can recommend for you as well. Because explaining it to your board of, hey, maybe we need to slow down, another board member is a lot more helpful than when we know that you know what your internal staff is. But that's another resource that we think can help you.
This is June. One more question. This is actually for the participants on this webinar, is on the evaluation that we really hope you do, just a little bit of detail, and do you think you need more training around this topic? Because again, even though we've had a couple hours, the questions are great. So specifically, if you feel like your organization or your advocates need more training around this, what specifically would you like your org to get training on? And that can help direct the coalition on their work plan on training across the state. So please be really specific about what you think your group could benefit from.
This is Judy. I want to give a shout out to the National Network Against Domestic Violence as well, and their Safety Net project. I put something in the chat so you can see the link to their safety planning resources and tools for survivors and advocates on all kinds of detailed technology topics. So safety planning around cell phones, safety planning around using the internet, other cyber stalking, other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And just to add on to that, NNEDV does do a safety net conference this year. I believe it is on the West Coast. Not exactly sure where, but that is even if you can only grab the PowerPoints and highlights of the conference, if you can't attend, or even attending, that is by far the best place for advocates and agencies to get up to speed on this issue where it intersects domestic violence.
Well, this has been fantastic, and I know you, Wade and Brian, you guys are both actually in Texas, right?
Yes.
See, this is just awesome. You're there, I'm here, we're working this all out. We are like really bringing the information. I know you've been to Seattle before, and I heard it was fantastic when you came last time. So I just want to let people know that folks around our country are doing this work, and they're really here to help us and support us in how we do our technology. Wade and Brian's information is right up there on the screen for you. If you need to contact them or get more information from them, please do so. I'm also available here at the Coalition. You can contact me if you have questions, but like June said, I think it would be great if you were really specific in your questions or things that you need or resources that you need at the very end of this webinar. You can write that down and we can get back to you. And I just want to really thank folks for coming out and asking such great questions, because I know, I'm sitting here talking to Judy and June, and we're like, all these things on our phone. Our phone, every time I turn around, it says update app. And I'm like, well, what did they forget what did they leave out? It seems like I have everything. But I really feel like that our phones are continuing to grow and grow in ways that we don't even understand how to operate the systems that are in them, and we don't even know what they're doing. And so we don't even realize how vulnerable we are to our communities and to folks, because we're putting so much information out on our phone. I even think about how we do our banking. We're doing banking on our phones now. So no longer hiding money in the mattress, it is on our telephones. So I just realized that we're really making ourselves vulnerable, and I want people to know how to keep safe and to keep their survivors safe with their technical devices. And I think you and Brian and Wade have really helped us understand a little bit more about that. And I want to thank you both for being here today. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. And like I said, we are available, and we will add some documents to that bit.ly link in probably the next day or so. So if you get the first round, it may just be our slides, but the second round we'll have some more information that we can add to that.
Sure, that's fantastic. Are there any other questions? No? Oh, okay. All right. So I want to thank you guys. I see that you have a picture of you here with an astronaut blow up thing. And are you planning on doing some tech safety stuff on the moon?
That was the South by Southwest Interactive from I think that's actually from a couple years back. We're much more. We have a lot more gray hair now.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate that. And folks, make sure you contact us with your questions, and it's been awesome. So thank you so much, Wade. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And if you still have questions, feel free to go ahead and email those questions into us, and we'll take a few more questions just to make sure we've got everything covered. Thanks for joining us today. Digital service, is this bit.ly digital service thing, is that them?
I think that's their link.
Okay, somebody said it's not working.
They're going to